And good morning, everyone, and good evening for Mr. Laurent Richard. We are on behalf of the South Asia and Southeast Asia Athletic Coaches Association. We welcome you all to the last session of the virtual coaches meeting. So our topic today is expert view on Asia sprinters performance. So welcome our expert, Mr. Laurent Richard and Mr. Zainal Abbas. Okay, Pak Zainal Abbas, all is yours now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Ria, and thank you as well to Pak Ria and Madam Ria and all the team in Jakarta for arranging this special session. I think this is the last of the 3 sessions in which has been conducted by ADC Jakarta in helping the coaches to be involved and to get the atmosphere of the Olympic Games. Of course, we know the Olympic Games is going on right now, and in conjunction with that, I think it's a great effort by ADC Jakarta to organize, together with the Southeast Asia Coaches Association, organize these special sessions. And today, of course, we have a special expert with us to share all his experience. He's very well known in Southeast Asia. I think it's well traveled all around the world. And he's none other than Mr. Laurent Richard. I believe he's got a very long list of accolades with him, but allow me, before I allow him to continue to you and to start with the discussion, to just tell you a little bit about Mr. Seagrave. Of course, he is currently the chief coach and co-founder and principal of Speed Academics in Ohio. But prior to that, I think he started his career with several universities in the US, with Wisconsin, Tennessee, Louisiana State University as track and field head coach with all those universities. And then he migrated actually to Australia back in 1995 and 1996, where he was the head coach to Phil King of Athletics Australia. He was also in Thailand, working with the Athletics Association of Thailand, as the head sprint and hurdles coach and consultant to chief coach Supanat. Of course, is well known in Thailand and also in Asia, to help in the development of athletics, especially in sprints in Thailand. But I'm quite interested in his involvement with the American football team, the Atlanta Falcons. Now, his career has been with the Atlanta Falcons. He's always had that close connection, and it all started, I think, in 1998 when he was speed and movement consultant for Atlanta Falcons. So indeed, quite a huge range of involvement, not only in athletics, but also in American football, and helping with the speed as a speed and movement consultant. He was also with Liberia. He was involved with the Liberian Olympic Committee as Chief Olympic Coach for the Sydney Olympic Games. And of course, he is also the founder and Chief Performance Officer for Velocity Sports Performance in Georgia. It's quite a long list. He's been with the Chinese Athletics Association as well. And he's well traveled in Asia, and being involved again with Thailand back in 2018, 2019. As the head and sprints relay coach and consultant to chief coach, again, the Honorable Supanat. He's also back with Atlanta Falcons in 2019 as performance consultant. So his involvement, as I mentioned, with American football is quite unique. And if you like baseball, he's also the performance consultant to Kevin Barr, the head strength and conditioning coach for Miami Marlins Major League Baseball. So quite well traveled, not only in athletics, but also in American football and also in baseball. Now, among the notable performances or the athletes in which he have coached previously, of course, is Dwight Phillips, USA, the 2009 world champion in long jump. He's also produced Angelo Taylor, ranked 4th in the 400 meter and 5th in the 400 meter hurdles. Joyce Maduka, Darla Kalishna, Alina Tele, and of course a huge array of athletes as well from the US and all across as well. in which he has guided to excellence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will learn a lot from Laurent today. He's prepared some video and some analysis for us. Just before we start, a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your mic muted. We want to also make this session a little bit more interactive. So if you have any questions, what you can do is just to raise your hand up, or you can just type it up in the chat room, and we'll try and get Laurent to give some enlightenment to some of your questions. So he'll give you some analysis and some video for you to watch. So please make use of this opportunity to share some of those experience from Laurent, and you can adapt it with your own country's performance in athletics, especially in sprints today. So without delay, Laurent, I think let's get you to say a few words and start with the discussion today. Laurent?
Well, thank you very much for thinking of me and inviting me to spend some time with your coaches and your member federations as part of the South and Southeast Asian Coaches Association. It's a great thing that you're bringing this back together, because there's a lot of potential sharing that can happen in many different levels that will assist in improving performance across the board in all of the different events. I'm going to spend time looking at sprinting specifically, but many of the things that we're going to say in the latter part of the presentation can apply to all of the events.
To start, maybe I was just saying just now, this program is being held in conjunction with the Olympic Games. It has been delayed from 2020 now to 2021 because of the COVID pandemic. So how do you see, perhaps to start off, how do you see that delay in the games being held to 2021 has affected the preparation and performance of the athletes all across the world?
I think that there's two ways to look at it. The athletes that are moving toward the end of their high performance years and perhaps considering retirement, this was a bit of a challenge for many people. They had to make some sacrifices they didn't plan on and go through a year of 2020 where there really wasn't much competition at all. On the other hand, what we're seeing in many of the events, particularly the long sprint and the long hurdle events, is that perhaps the extra year of maturity and the extra year of training that was used by some of the younger athletes actually has benefited them. And so many factors come into performance. One of them is being able to pay the bills. And so the athletes that weren't well supported financially, either by contract shoe companies, federations, corporations, had to make some hard decisions, and some did not actually return to competition. So they retired when they heard about that. But many people were really hungry this year to compete. And, again, we saw this in the whole progression of results throughout the entire year as we moved into the Olympic Games, and now in the heat of the Olympic Games, literally and figuratively. And, tonight, I guess tonight your time will be the last time in the stadium, and then with the men's marathon following the next day.
So just looking back, sometimes when athletes or coaches for big games like this, we talk about the Olympic cycle. Every 4 years you have that Olympic cycle. For the 2020 Olympics, it has been affected by the pandemic, and as you rightly pointed out, that has given opportunities depending on, again, when we talk about the performance, the training age, and also the biological age of the athletes will also affect the performance at the games. But there has been many records being broken in the games, and one of the factors which has been speculated around the world is the quality of the track itself. The new stadium and the new track which was being laid on the track has also affected that performance. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, so some of you are old enough to remember the World Championships that were in Tokyo. The track was prepared the year before, and many of you will remember not only the sprinting and hurdling events were extremely fast, but also the world record was set in the long jump, which is largely predicated on speed down the runway. And so I think something similar has happened again in the preparation of the track for the Olympic Stadium. It was actually finished in 2019, not even having any anticipation that there would be a postponement. And once it was laid, the officials came out and did everything and bounced the little ball off the track to see how much force absorption there was. And at the right time of the day, they measured it at 35% absorption. Now, this is, if it's 35% absorption, what it means is 65% return, which for the sprinters and the jumpers is quite excellent. Distance runners may not necessarily agree with you if they have to train on a surface like this. But the other thing that occurs, even with a surface like Mondo, that's manufactured in controlled conditions, so that they can really control all of the variables. Once it's out in the sun, it has a tendency to cure in a similar way to a poured track. And so what's happened now is that the effect of the heat in the sun, not only 1 year, but 2 years after the fact, has really made a tremendously fast track. Very responsive.
Yeah, certainly that has helped the athletes, especially as mentioned in the sprints and jump event. And we've seen their performance at the Tokyo Games. And I believe coaches as well need to be aware of this condition in order to help the athletes' performance. Now, just coming back and focusing a little bit on our Asian performance, how do you think our Asian athletes have fared at the Olympic Games this year?
I think there's been a progression overall in the number of athletes that are qualifying in certain events, and how they're progressing through from the quarterfinals to the semifinals, and of course Su Bingtian managing to make the Olympic final in the 100 meters. But again, I think there's still room for improvement in many events, and that's what I would like to address and speak to in the second part of the presentation.
Right. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, Laurent has actually prepared some presentation for us, some video presentation, as well as some performance analysis on the athletes as well, and comparing it with the previous Olympic Games. And just on that, Laurent, how do you see the evolution over from 2016 at Rio and now in Tokyo? Has there been any glaring changes or improvement made by the athletes in terms of performance in comparing these two games?
Well, I think overall the performances are quite, if you look at the average time that it took to make the finals in, for example, all of the events this year, including the 4x1 relay, which was quite exciting, having two Asian teams make the final in the men's 4x1, and the Chinese women, of course, qualifying for the final in the 4x100 meter relay. But the average performances were much higher. The peak performances, the number of Olympic records, the performances achieved by even the athletes relative to their personal bests and relative to their season bests in the first round. Many people have improved their performances, and so there's many factors that could be contributory. We've already discussed the interesting characteristics of the track. The introduction of new shoe technology is another very interesting topic that I was interviewed on a couple times about 4 weeks ago, in anticipation of people using these shoes, improved shoes in competition. And again, I think that coaches and the training and the sports sciences continues to get better all the time. this is something that I think we'll see continue for a long time as we understand how better to make the human body function and perform.
Right. Of course, you are the founder of Speed Dynamics, and talking about speed and performance in the sprint event. If we look nowadays, even the 400 meter can be considered as a sprint event. It's no longer something which is being considered as a long distance or middle distance event. It can be considered as a sprint event as well. We look at the likes of athletes in the sprint event, starting the season probably with competing in the 400 meter instead of competing in the 100 meter straight. So how do you see that, the comparison between this 100 meter, 200 meter, and now 400 meter, and even 800 meter is fully dynamic nowadays?
Yeah, so when you start to look at 100 meter and 200 meter personal bests and seasonal bests of 400 meter runners, it's obvious that, for example, if you want to make the final in the men's 400 meter, your 200 meter time needs to be very low 20-second range or sub 20-second range. I had the good possibility of training LaShawn Merritt from 2012 through 2014. And his personal best was 19.7. Okay, now his 100 meter best was 10.50, but he ran that when he was an 18-year-old. So you know that he had to be much stronger. And so there's two different dynamics, I think, that occur between the 100 and the 400. I had an opportunity to reacquaint myself with Galina, who is the 400 meter coach of the Indian Federation. And we did a training camp together in Spawa, Poland. And we were talking about different things, and we had the Thai 4x1 there. And I said, I really would like to have a little bit better competition in these Polish competitions. And she said, well, I can put together some people. They all have run, 10.25, 10.3, but they're 400 meter runners. They're not fast enough for the 100 meters. So understanding that to be able to take the characteristics that are important for 400 meter running and find them in someone that's currently running the 100 meters can yield extremely positive results. And you'll see in this, as we start breaking down the statistics, as the distance goes up, the number of Asian country athletes that make the next round or even qualify goes down. Now, there are certain cultural things. In some countries, the 100 meters is the thing, and the 4x100 meters is the most important event. And so there's a reluctance for the athletes to try to expand and explore looking at the 400 meters. And so you end up having lower level sprint talent trying to just run from a middle distance base almost, the 400. And once you get to the level where you're talking about Olympic qualifying standards, world qualifying standards, you have to have near world-class speed in the 100 meters. Just my experience in Thailand, we had very, very gifted athletes, and I had the group of 100 and 200 meter runners, and many of them had the physiological characteristics to become or to be pretty good 400 meter runners. And the exactly four athletes that I had identified to that, we really talked about that and said, okay, we would like to maybe jump in and try a 4x4 or just a 400 in a meet somewhere that they can run against themselves as a test to see, okay, who has the physiological characteristics added to the speed characteristics to make the move. And so I think that this is a real interesting dynamic that coaches and sports scientists in your various member federations can explore as possibilities.
Yeah, and of course, Laurent, the sprint event relation with the, for example, the long jump, with most 100-meter sprinters, thinking as well to long jump. We know Carl Lewis, of course, was one of them with winning the 100-meter, 200-meter, as well as the long jump at the Olympic Games, and winning his last Olympic gold medals at the age of 35 at the Atlanta Games in the long jump. So even at 35, he can still perform and getting that gold medal in the Atlanta Games.
That's exactly right. And just to expand upon that era more, Leroy Baril was also a long jumper, as was Bruni Surin from Canada. And they parlayed that speed down the runway with improved technique, and were able to run extremely fast in the 100 meters. And you'll also be interested to know, when I was working with the Italian Federation, and we were in training camp, the long jumpers were in training camp at the same time. And this is the first time that I had a chance to watch Marcel Jacobs. And I told my colleague Elio Locatelli, God rest his soul, that you need to invite Marcel to the next relay camp, because this guy has some real speed capacity. And he's been with the same coach who has a triple jump background, but they were doing a lot of cross coaching and getting good information and sharing. And, you know, the result is pretty obvious. He won the Olympic final gold medal in an unbelievable fast new European record. And so another example of a long jumper that can go to the 100 meters, but you also have, in situations, 100-meter runners or 100-meter hurdlers who have never really explored the possibility of long jump. And we were going to do that with two of the sprinters, two of the Thai sprinters. We're going to work with a horizontal jump coach, Valerie Obiedko, and see what their performance capacity might be in that event if they really trained for it for 1 year. So looking at cross-pollination in terms of events, I think, is extremely important in identifying the potential of all of your athletes on your squad.
But Usain Bolt never really took part in the long jump, did he, at the highest level?
Who was that now?
Usain Bolt?
Usain Bolt? No, he never. I don't think he ever even played with it. You know, his coach, Glenn Mills, who was actually one of my students back in the early days of coach education in the Caribbean, was trying to convince him he should be a 400-meter runner. And he said, okay, this next meet, I run the 200. And if I run this time, then you stop telling me I need to be a 400-meter runner and I can be a sprinter then. And so, of course, he ran the time, and Glenn, a man of his words, never mentioned the 400 meters again to him.
Okay.
But you're right. He probably could have run a great relay leg had they needed him.
So, Laurent, now just deep diving into the performance of the athletes at the Olympic Games, you have prepared some analysis for us to maybe discuss today?
Yes, just to look at some general analysis across the board, and then to try to drill down. I don't have any video because it's really a presentation that doesn't lend itself well to video. But let me just pull up that presentation here. And so make this full screen, make a slideshow from the beginning. And so what I want to do is take a bit of a statistical look at the Olympic performance levels of the athletes from not only South and Southeast Asia, but also East Asia, because I think we can learn a lot and share back and forth in this entire region, because there's many people doing some great things in that area. And so if we just take a look at just an overall look, and these are not all of the countries that are represented, but these are the countries that actually had people that participated in the events of the Olympic Games, either in 2016 or 2021. And the thing that I need to share particularly is in the 100 meters. We see that there's a great participation in the 100 meters in this games here. What we have to remember is that the 100 meters is oftentimes the event that is selected by member federations when they get kind of an invitation because they really don't have an athlete that's qualified. And so these numbers sometimes are a little bit artificially inflated. When we break it down and start to look at, okay, who is actually in the quarterfinals, this gives us a better idea. But again, not taking a real deep dive look to see who ran personal bests or who ran seasonal bests. Many of the athletes that were participating in the 100 meters, both men and women by invitation, actually did personal bests in the games, in the event. So it very, very fruitful from an experiential standpoint, and gives them a taste and makes them hungry, so they go back and they can continue to work harder and continue to improve. So I think that there's a lot of benefit with that. The one thing that that really stands out is Japan seems to have figured out how to get more people qualified to the games than any of the other countries, and it also is such that they're starting to put 3 people in the different events. So which allows them to, they had 3 100-meter hurdlers on the women's side. They had 3 400-meter hurdlers on the men's side. And so they're really doing a quite excellent job there. And we can drill down and talk about some of the factors that may be ongoing as we go through the different things that affect performance. And so rather than spend a lot of time on this slide, I'm going to disappear from this slide, and I'm going to share another screen where we can get a little bit more granular. Now, is this visible to everyone? It should look like an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, yes, visible.
Okay, so this is a little bit more granular in that we're looking at countries that qualified athletes for the men's 100 meters and the difference between 2016 and 2021. And we can see that in the preliminary round, it was about half as many people were in the preliminary round this time as in 2016. Now, this could be just the difference that in the country, maybe someone made an Olympic qualifying standard and it didn't be, so that we can't really make some conclusions there. But when we start to look at the quarterfinals and see that in 2016, 10 athletes out of the approximately 50 or 60 athletes that were advanced to the quarterfinals were from the region that we're targeting right now. And we see that was maintained extremely well in 2021. Again, the countries that seem to be making the big inroads in the 100 meters, China is doing very well. The emphasis that they put on the development program in various ways has produced very good results. And one of their athletes, of course, Su Bingtian, went through to the final, had a little bit slow reaction and wasn't a typical start. Otherwise, might have been a medal contender based on his performance in the semifinals. You never can tell from the outside if there may have been a little bit of an injury or he was trying to protect something or that kind of thing. But by virtue of the fact that they made it to the final, as he did also in 2015, when the World Championships were in Beijing. And so looking at this and the way it breaks down, there's room for improvement in order to be able to get more people into the Olympic Games. However, the standards keep going up. And the other thing that we're going to discuss a little bit is the ranking points and how it's possible to run the Olympic standard but not get an invitation because your rank is below other people on the list. And so we can talk about that in a short while. When we look at the women's numbers, again, we see in the preliminary round, we see a lot more women represented in 2021, which I think is a very much of a plus. We see an increased number in the quarterfinals and how they're coming through. In Japan, they don't seem to have the same success that they had in the men's program, but the Chinese athletes are starting to come through a lot better. 2021, they qualified 3 athletes and 1 went through to the semifinal. That's G. Interestingly enough, I had an opportunity to work with her when she was 17 years old for a 4-week camp that her federation sent her over to just to assess her abilities and assess her potential. And so she's coming through quite nicely. Now on the men, you can see, as I mentioned just in passing, that in the introduction, that as the distance seems to go up, the number of athletes from the region seems to go down that are qualifying. And so this might be, to your point, maybe we need to look at the situation of training, looking at the people that have the right physiological qualities to run 400 meters that are running 100 meters and have the speed needed for that. Interestingly enough, you'll notice Fred Curley was a very, very talented 400 meter runner when he ran collegiately and when he ran professionally. And he chose this year to change coaches to a coach that has a more sprint-based program. And I guess the rest is history. He won a medal in the 100 meters. And so athletes going both directions are positives here. We see the Japanese put 3 women in the 200, although they didn't have any women in the 100. Now that could be that they actually ran qualification standards in the 100, but they said, we feel like they have better chances in the 200, so why, use up their legs when something we know that they're going to be able to do better at in the 200 meters. But again, 5 people this year in the 200 on the men's side. And then on the women's side, we saw about the same number represented from some of the same countries, but some of the countries that have typically done well in the 200 meters, Singapore, Philippines, and India. The one thing that stood out to me was Korea, and I didn't have a chance to really drill down and find out necessarily the personal best and the season's best on the woman from Pakistan, but knowing the other ones, it seemed like their performance at the Olympic Games was less than you would consider based on what their seasonal bests are and what their personal bests are. Now there could be a lot of reasons for that, but again, the whole concept of peaking is trying to get your athlete to perform the season best or near the personal best at the focal competition, which is the Olympic Games. And so from a performance director standpoint and a member federation or a chief coach, during the debriefing, this would be one of the questions that you would want to explore a little bit more and get the input from the coach. Okay, what exactly might have happened in this situation? Men in the 400, again, we see that there aren't that many people that are actually qualifying. And again, I did not go back and look at all of the standards, I know that India has some very talented male 400-meter runners. They also have some talented female 400-meter runners. But again, maybe the strategy was that, okay, let's just save the legs and really try to make a great run at it. And they did in the 4x4, just barely missing a place in the final. So their performance in the 4x4 was excellent. So it makes me believe maybe that strategically they may have chosen that route rather than allowing people to run individual events, which is, I mean, it almost worked if that's the case. The women, outside of one athlete that from India that represented that country in 2016, it's been pretty much non-existent, with the exception of Vietnam. I had the pleasure to work with the Vietnamese 4x400-meter relay team in the preparation for 2014-2015, and I happen to know that the woman that ran in 2014 is different than the woman that ran in the other ones here, but made it to in this year. Quoc Thi Lan made it all the way to the semifinals. But even more remarkable, she also is a 400 hurdler, and they've had some excellent results in that. This is one of the events that I think that the Asian athletes and the coaches and the member federation, for some reason, have either put more emphasis on, or the time to develop the athletes has come through, and that you can see that Chinese Taipei, Hong Kong, Japan had 2 instead of 1, and then China also had an athlete that performed very well. He was working in conjunction with a coach based out of the United States, who was working with, who has worked with, and what is currently training with a former American record holder. And so that worked out very well for them from a performance standpoint. In the women's 100 hurdles, again, 2 countries are producing hurdlers. When I was coaching at the Louisiana State University, I had a simple thing that we would say: everyone is a hurdler until they prove otherwise. Because if you take a person who won't make the standard, maybe will come close in the 100 meters, and they have the right power, they have the right coordination, they have the right flexibility, and they're about half crazy, because good hurdlers are at least half crazy because you're flirting with danger all the time. It may be good to encourage younger athletes to try the hurdles and do the sprint and long jump at the same time in order to see which path is going to be the best one for them. But people won't self-select the hurdles. They won't say, I don't want to, in 5 years, I don't want to make it look like I've been shaving my legs with a broken bottle. So it's something that they have to be shown that if they choose this, your light maybe can shine a little bit brighter for you in your career than if you're just another 100-meter runner. So, and one thing I want to show you here, you'll notice that this athlete in 2016 made the semifinals, but she wasn't listed in the quarterfinals. Why is that? Because they didn't have enough participants in order to run a quarterfinal round. There were so few hurdlers in 2016. They just ran 5 heats and advanced people into the final from that way. So just another example of there's a lot more possibility and potential to really be a hurdler. And this is why I encourage coaches really fall in love with the hurdles, because you can really teach and you can really coach an athlete up to their ability.
Yeah, Lauren, I think with the World Athletics syllabus, of course, they started with kids athletics. Kids athletics is where the kids were actually exposed to the simpler version of athletics. before they actually being introduced to all the event. And of course, multilateral or multi-event is one of the element which is being stressed in the coaching system for World Athletics. And I believe, if you introduce those athletes with all these kinds of all the various events, specialization should only happen after maturity or after puberty. Yeah.
We're certainly going to have that discussion later on. That's a key point in development, and oftentimes people rush to get people ready to compete rather than developing the physical literacy to be able to do more events and have more skills and have a well-rounded preparation.
Mm-hmm.
But the one caveat, there's the transition, I'm sorry, between kids athletics where they're running over banana boxes or pizza boxes and when they want to run real hurdles. And Wolfgang Rietzdorf shared this with me because Germany is a very big proponent of multilateral multi-event approach with the young athletes. And he said that many of the athletes were quite frustrated because they weren't allowed to progress a little bit more challenging event. They kept them on banana boxes instead of, scissor hurdles or lower hurdles, still not going over the real hurdles, but making a progression so they could feel more like hurdling. But we can talk about that later. Let's see, 400-meter hurdles. Again, we're starting to see more participation in the 400 hurdles, and but on the women's side, we actually lost one from 2016. Again, this is Kwak Tilan. This is one of their other 400-meter hurdlers who took a little bit of time out and had a child and actually came back and ran well. I don't know what her current situation is, if she's injured or that type of thing, but also very talented athlete. Let me stop sharing this and jump over to this slideshow. Current slide. So let's talk a little bit about key performance indicators and what are the things that we need to control or we need to facilitate in order to be able to ensure that athletes are progressing. And I'm talking about progressing from not knowing what athletics is to the Olympic Games. And so just going through the different things, what factors can determine, not necessarily do determine, success in sprinting or hurdling. And one of them is just population base. If you're trying to make an Olympic, trying to build an Olympic team from San Marino or Andorra or Luxembourg or Liechtenstein, you don't have a very big population to draw on. And so population in that situation becomes real important. Sport culture. What is the feeling? What is the thinking? What is the action, especially the sociological interaction of sport in each individual country? And to be able to identify that in your particular situation so that it can be addressed and maximized. Opportunity. If someone never sees a hurdle, there's a good chance that they won't know about hurdling. So what kind of an opportunity do they have? Coaching is one of the big factors, and we'll spend a little bit of time on that as we go through, a little bit more time than on some of these other things. Support. This can mean a lot of different things, and we'll drill down into each one of those. Generally held beliefs. There are certain beliefs that people in certain parts of the world have about different things that can negatively affect performance or negatively affect an athlete's ability or willingness to really train and compete. Coach development. Now, I'm gonna just say one thing here. Coach education is different than coach development. Coach education is a subset of coach development. And the other thing I want to talk about is the concept of mentorship and how that is so beneficial in taking the coach and moving them to the next level. Athletes need to be developed and educated. The better the athlete understands why they're doing what they're doing and how it's going to get to them to their own personal finish line faster, the better compliance, the more excited they'll be to train. Member federations need to make sure that they understand the dynamic and are willing to support the movement forward. And this is a very synergistic working with the athletes and the coaches and the federation working together to put people in the best situation for success. Then access to high-level competitions. This is a challenge if you've been only able to run in your country, and you have a particularly talented athlete, and then you go to the Olympic Games without running against other people in the same thing. It's a little bit of a challenge. The concept of training partners and training groups. This is something that we've seen over the last 10 years around the world, is that, if the coach is out there one-on-one with the athlete, if the athlete has a bad day, the coach has a bad day. And so the whole concept of having support training partners or within a training group has a real positive effect on all of the members of that group and the coach. And then lastly, I want to talk about talent identification systems, particularly in terms of the way some of them can become very flawed in terms of being productive and really doing what they're supposed to do. Population. Having a foundation population ensures that you're going to have people to draw upon, and that the athletic potential, because the population is greater, athletic potential or the number of athletic potential individuals is going to be higher. However, population, if it's not accessible, if you can't get at it, if there's an issue that they don't want to participate, then that's a different scenario. And so oftentimes the socio-cultural orientation of the population may have more relevance than the actual number of bodies that you have in a country. And if you look at just overall population, of the top 15 most populous countries in the world, 8 of them fall in kind of the regions that we're looking at tonight, or today in your case. And so being able to look at that, it's not necessarily something that straight across the board correlates with athletic success. And if you drill down and look at European countries, they're much, much less populous, but they seem to be having more success. Sport culture really is something that I think needs to be developed if it doesn't exist in a positive way toward athletics. And so if you ask a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? Someone's going to say a doctor or a lawyer, or someone might choose a professional sport athlete. But how popular and important is sport in your country? In some countries, people there are sports crazy, and this is something that everybody wants to do. I want to be the best footballer in my country, or the best footballer in my state, or the best footballer in my city. And because football is the sport that they want to go after, and being able to identify, people don't normally say, I want to be a 400 hurdler. That's something that we have to cultivate, and particularly using successful athletes in those events in order to stimulate interest and stimulate growth. I think that Athletics Association of Thailand, in conjunction with Nike, did a very big promotion of the hurdles with Lewadi Watanason back in 1997 and 98. And, she is probably one of the most recognizable athletes in Thailand. If you go into a restaurant or you're walking down the street, they know who she is. And so helping the athletes that are at the top become sports heroes in your particular country is something that's going to reap benefits very, very far into the action. Sport cultures in many countries dominated by football. Some countries, cricket. Other countries will have their own unique sports that are going to be popular. It's interesting in a country like Jamaica that has a relatively small population. They have an extremely strong track and field program, not only at the elite level, but at the junior level and even younger. And because when little boys and little girls are growing up, they don't want to be a footballer. They don't want to be a fast bowler in cricket. They want to be a sprint champion. They want to be the 100-meter champion of their school. They want to be the boys and girls champs is extremely important, where high schools are going against one another, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But the whole belief that, okay, being the top sprinter is important. And then, okay, if you're not going to be the top sprinter, then maybe you can be the top 400-meter runner, or maybe the top 800-meter runner, or the top hurdler. And so you hear stories about how athletes develop in Jamaica. It's largely because of the sports culture in the country. It's extremely strong. How can you make, even in your region, that important? How do you develop sports heroes in your country?
Laurent, I would totally agree with you about this culture in Asian countries. Of course, football is the in thing in most countries, as you rightly pointed out. But you have traveled across Asia, working with China, working with Thailand, Liberia, and several other countries as well. So how do you see the culture in Asia, for example, and how that how can we promote that sporting culture in athletics?
So I think that there's, just in my observation, mostly in Thailand, not so much in China, all of the male sprinters played football at some point in time. And they even during transition periods, they form their own little teams and they play in 5-a-side leagues at the Thammasat University or other small universities and things like that. So the key point, and rugby is becoming more popular in Thailand also. But I think the key point is that you continue the multi-sport preparation and then look for the people that have got the qualities to be a sprinter and invite them for a tryout or a session or that type of thing. They have a saying on a T-shirt in the United States, good friends don't let friends play soccer, which is, of course, football. Because what's happening is, it's fun to chase a ball around and be with your friends and that kind of thing. Whereas that's play. If you come out and do athletics, that's work. And so being able to understand how to, incorporate kind of a situation where you're working alongside and watching the different talents that are coming through on the various sports, and then almost recruiting them to let them have a go. Say, hey, you're pretty fast. Why don't you come out and try this, a couple nights a week? And so I think that's one way to do that. At least that's the way it seems to be, be done right now in the United States. In the high school program, if you're not the best footballer, but you're pretty fast, and you win the state championship and you can get a scholarship to a university, this is something that's worthwhile, which we will also touch on.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Laurent, because I believe the responsibility of the coach themselves to make their training session interesting and fun for the athletes in order to sustain that interest in the sport. And I think we would also, in this session, would like to open it to all our participants. If you have any questions which you would like to ask Laurent, you can either type it in the chat room, or you can just raise your hand and ask the question. We would like to hear from you as well on what you would like to be enlightened on. So if you have anything, you can just ask, and we will read out whether it is in the chat room or if you can ask the questions yourself. Now, Laurent, how brave do you see the Asian country moving away from that? We saw in your statistics just now that as we progress from the shorter event to the longer event, the number is starting to dwindle, as you mentioned. So how brave are the Asian countries, you think, to move away from this blue ribbon event and you know, give opportunities for athletes to actually be involved in the longer distance event?
I think the responsibility largely falls on the coach to be able to do the kind of testing that is required to figure out if the athlete has the right physiological capacity in order to be able to navigate the longer sprints. The one thing that stands out in science, in sports science, is we basically had hung our hat for many years on research that had been done in 1972 at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, where they were collecting air in weather balloons and trying to do gas analysis on them. And so Per-Olof Östrand came out and said, okay, the 400 meters is only 25% aerobic or 20% aerobic. And now Gaston, 10 years ago, with more sophisticated equipment, said, well, yeah, one of the events is maybe 20% aerobic, but it's the 200 meters. The 400 meters is almost 40 to 43% aerobic. And so you've got to have a person that has a little bit different characteristics, and the training has to be different. But in order to be able to do that, to be able to test your athletes systematically and find out who has the physiological capacity. And then I can tell you right now, the biggest mistake that I have ever made in my coaching career was my second year coaching high school. And this was 1974. Is I had an athlete, Barbara Nicholson, and she was I thought, the consummate 400 meter runner. Fast, but great endurance, long legs, smooth stride, very efficient. And she said, I don't want to run the 400 meters. I said, no, you run the 400 meters. She said, well, then I'll quit. And so you have to be a bit of this was in my young coaching career when I was more stupid than smart, but you have to be very selective about how much you push an athlete so you don't push them right out the door. So there's two other components here in terms of sport culture, is how does the importance of sport compare with the importance of education? And so we've had situations whereby the parent predominantly with junior athletes will say, now if your grades start slipping below perfect, we're gonna keep you from going to practice. And so in many countries, the value of a good education, if you can be a doctor or a lawyer or someone that has a high level of education and consequently is compensated for that, you're set for life. And so this is something that you need to look at in your own country and how that dynamic works. And finally, sport versus vocation or occupation. even in the United States, we see very talented athletes that basically say, you know, I can't really go on in athletics because I need to generate money for not only me but for my family. And so figuring out ways around that kind of situation, I think, is extremely important.
And what would you say would be, if we focus back on the sprint event, how would you say, how can we get more athletes to actually qualify to the finals? As we mentioned, we saw in your presentation just now in the Excel sheet, that number to get to the final and actually onto the podium in the sprint event is something which I think most countries would be looking at and dreaming of. And how do you see, or what do you see can be done in terms of training to help get our Asian athletes on the podium at the games?
It's a 2 or 3 year process, and it involves at looking at your squad, whether it's your own personal training group as a coach, whether it's a state or a regional training group, or whether it's the national team, and developing the systematic tests that you can run. Okay, well, what's their general aerobic capacity? How can you test that? And then it depends on if you have sports scientists that can help you, you can do this very easily on a treadmill. If not, there's ways you can do it on the track. But to find that person and find the person that has the potential to develop tremendous glycolytic capacity. That means run the glycogen through that first step of the glycolytic pathway, the anaerobic lactic pathway, and generate a large amount of energy in that area, and be able to then buffer the lactic acid that it comes along with it. And so developing that, now you have a pool of athletes that you feel have the physiological capacity. Now who has the mental capacity and the psychological capacity to be able to deal with a little bit change in the training, which is going to be perceived as harder. And so, you know, some people would rather be kind of medium, middle of the pack, and they need to do this much work, but in order to step up the work to the next level, that maybe is something that you need to be able to identify and help that athlete work through, so that they understand that the benefits and the rewards of doing this is going to far exceed you know, the little bit extra work that they have to do.
All right, we've got 2 people with hands up here. We've got Venkata first. Before I go to you, Trisha, let Venkata for your question.
Good morning, sir.
Hello.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Sir, I have two questions. Sir, one is on short sprint. The short sprints, mainly the energy system is ATP CP, and what are the food, like adenosine triphosphate dominating foods? Hello.
Okay, I know exactly where you're going for this. I wish I had my PowerPoint slide from Professor Uli Hartmann, who's a brilliant professor at Leipzig and the Sporthochschule in Cologne. Here's basically, let me describe it to you. And so, yes. if you chart speed,
yes, sir.
Or if you chart velocity against the energy systems, and so you are correct, ATP is used 100%. If you don't have ATP, or you have a lesser amount of ATP, you can't perform at the same level. And so you've got to regenerate ATP. Now, the other thing is that all of the energy systems start at a little bit different times. And so your ability to break down phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate can be improved. And it means that you can create more energy from anaerobic alactic training and metabolic realization, so that you can maintain the high level of ATP. This lasts about 4 or 5 seconds.
Yes, sir.
And then your creatine phosphate levels start to deplete. Now, the difference between well-trained sprinters and not so well-trained sprinters, or responders versus non-responders, is this. The glycolytic system has a little bit delay on sprinters that don't have that capacity or haven't been trained at that level, in that way. And so it starts a little bit later, and its slope is a little bit less, so it doesn't go up as fast, and it doesn't go up as high. And so the amount of energy that's created through the glycolytic system is relatively low. Consequently, then, ATP starts falling off. And when ATP starts falling off, the concentration of ATP, then what starts happening is that that velocity starts to decrease. You start to slow down. Now, athletes who are well trained in this area, and our responders have the capacity. Their glycolytic system starts almost immediately under maximum intensity effort. And the slope of the increase in that glycolytic capacity increases at an extremely steep rate, and it goes extremely high on the graph. And so you have an area that's about 3 or 4 times the amount of energy that's created in the glycolytic system in the 100 meters now than you do in the less trained or the poorly trained sprinter. And so what that does is that then takes you out to about the 8 to 9 second range, and then you start to lose ATP. Also, the negative substrate breakdown products, primarily lactic acid that produces hydrogen ions, increases, and that starts shutting down muscle function. And all of a sudden now velocity falls off. What happens is that stride length actually increases because you don't have the power output. So you have to buy more time on the ground in order to put the required force in the ground. So stride length increases, but step length decreases, and consequently you decelerate. And so the ability to leverage the glycolytic system in the 100 meters is extremely important at the highest level.
Sir, one more, sir, last question. So in long sprints, like 400 meters,
Yes.
the lactic acid depositing capacity should be, or the tolerance capacity of the lactate. So what are the training methodology like to deposit lactate slowly, and after the lactate deposit, that can be used as an energy, that can be converted as energy? So like what, how best, like shortest period to convert this lactate into the energy? Like we have the recovery in between the intensive work. So how fast the recovery levels can be, what are the best ways we can improve the recovery levels? You can just.
So the first thing is to go back to the amount of the percentage of the amount of energy that's required by the various energy systems, by the ATP, by the CP, by the glycolytic system, and by the aerobic system. And what we know now is the aerobic system contributes a much higher amount of energy. And so this does not mean going out and running 5,000 meter runs with your 400 meter runners and your 400 meter hurdlers. It means that you're going to do more of what's called extensive repetition training, and where you're dealing with 70 to 80% of the velocity of that particular distance. So for example, if you're going to choose 200 meters, you would take the athlete's approximate time that they could run a maximum effort 200 meters, and you would then divide it by 0.7. And so if you have an athlete that can run 20 some seconds, let me just get my calculator out here. So let's say we have a pretty fast female that can run today, not the goal pace, but the date pace, 22 seconds. You divide that by 0.7. And so that's going to give you a 31-second pace. So what she's going to do is she's going to run 30 to 31 seconds for the 200, and then rest a relatively short amount of time, somewhere between 60 seconds, 90 seconds, or 2 minutes, depending on the time of the season. And you would try to run a volume, depending on the age of the athlete and the training experience, somewhere between 2,400 meters and 3,600 meters. And so that would be, for example, if you run 2 sets of 6 times 200 meters in 30 to 31 seconds on a 90-second rest with 5 to 10 minutes rest in between, this is not going to generate enough intensity in order to really kick in the glycolytic system. And when it is used, you'll have the available oxygen and develop a greater ability to have oxygen to be able to take the pyruvate and run it through the mitochondria, through the Krebs cycle, through the oxidative cycle. And so the goal is to increase the capillarization in the lung and the ventilation of perfusion to match those with the alveoli, so capillary and air sac, and then perfusion of the muscle, increase the rate of capillarization so that you get a closer relationship between the muscle cell and the capillary, so you get better oxygen exchange. And then the next thing is your cardiac output is higher. You start to develop a greater density, a greater number of mitochondria, which is the powerhouse for the cell. You start loading those mitochondria more with the oxidative enzymes of the Krebs cycle, so you can process that better because now you have more oxygen to do it. And then that is one of the ways that we have to increase that aerobic ability to replenish ATP for our longer sprinters. Now, they still have to do at the right time of the year. You don't do glycolytic work the whole year. So in general preparation, you're not doing special endurance 1, you're not doing special endurance 2. Special endurance 1 being 20 seconds to 40 seconds at somewhere around 95% effort on a little bit longer rest. That's something that comes in special preparation. So you don't do that all year. Dr. Ben Tabachnik, a famous Soviet coach, told me once, if you're generating high levels of acidity inside the cell, what you're doing is you're breaking down the enzymes inside the mitochondria. So you're getting one thing, but you're killing another situation. That's a whole 2-hour lecture, by the way, that I just did in 5 minutes. But
all right, thank you, Venkata, for your question. Now,
so thank you so much.
We also have Tricia Roberts who have raised her hand. But before she actually asked the question, now, Laurent, Tricia, we know, ran in the 100-meter hurdles. Do you think she would have done better in the 400-meter?
I don't know. To be honest, I've watched her run. She has good speed, good explosive power. Had good technique, good running between the hurdles, but I don't have any way of really knowing what the full capacity, the full glycolytic capacity and oxidative capacity would be. Yeah, I think she's probably well coordinated enough that she could learn to hurdle with the other leg if she didn't. I think in her era they were probably running 300 hurdles in Colorado, so she may have had some experience with that already. But I think she's very mentally tough, and so that wouldn't have been a problem with 400 hurdles. So but hard to say.
Okay, Tricia, On with your question.
Oh, actually, I did run the 400 hurdles at Arizona. Actually, I ran it about a couple of times, and then Fred Harvey told me not to run it in the finals because of points that I could get for the 100 hurdles. But I did have experience. It was hard for me to transition from the 100 hurdles to the 4. It's just getting that steps because I'm so used to going over the hurdles so quickly, and then trying to adapt and transition to the 400 and trying to change the perception of getting over the hurdles. I was just getting too quick over the hurdles, so my step was off. So that's the reason, part of the reason why too I didn't stick to the 400 hurdles. So I stuck to the 100 hurdles. But my question is, yeah. My question was, and you know how we've talked about this a lot when you were in Thailand, is I pretty much have like a gold mine of athletes in Thailand to become hurdlers from the sprinters. And it's just, I think part of it because culturally they've been taught that sprint is the king, and especially 4x1 is the thing in Thailand. It's like popular, and it's been marketing that way compared to other events which have done well and gone to the Olympics, whether it's discus, high jump, me as a hurdler and stuff like that, which marketing wise, we didn't get it as much. And I think that's part of the reason. But I've talked to some sprinters and trying to convince them to be hurdlers and tell them and try to convince them that they'll have more success. And that's what I'm having problems with. So my question would, how would I approach it maybe a different way to convince them? And that's the first question. I have a few other questions. So I guess that's the first question, is just convincing some of the sprinters to transition to the hurdles.
So I think
into a hurdler.
I think knowing the situation a little bit, if you're already dealing with senior sprinters, they're pretty much locked into what their ethos is. But working with coaches in the provinces and helping them learn how to introduce hurdling to the younger athletes so that they learn to enjoy it and that type of thing. And then being able to then bring them on to the junior team and then finally the senior team and continue to do things. I can see where it would be a tough sale to take some of the senior sprinters, although there's a couple of them that could do, I think, fairly well in the hurdles. But to change their mind at this point in time. Go for okay. Earlier and create allies out in the province with your coaching network, such that they start introducing the skill of hurdling earlier, and then the athletes begin to enjoy it and see that they can be pretty good at it, and then will continue to excel when they arrive on the national team, junior national team, or the national team level.
Okay. I guess as the second part of that, there are some athletes who secretly want to come to me and change into the hurdles, but of course, a lot of them fear of changing and asking the head coach and changing events. So that's, I guess, another question. How can the athlete and I go about doing that? I've talked with the head coach about it, and how do I say, I'm not getting a support on that part. So I think that's why the athletes who do want to come and change are having a hard time. And also another one, I have 2 athletes, and one of them I've worked maybe a year or 2 as a junior. He's improved some, but not much. But I know they'll be better at the 400-meter hurdles. And trying to convince them is so difficult. He's determined, no. He had to run it at the Thailand Nationals just recently, just the end of last year, only because he's trying to make the police, and one of the coaches said he had to run it, so that's the only reason why he ran it. But he didn't put a good effort in it because he wants to be a 110-meter hurdler, and he's so convinced he won't give 400-meter hurdle a try. And I'm not pushing him, but I just know what's going to happen because I had an athlete last year who was the same thing, and I tried to convince him, but in the end, he ended up stop athletics and have to get a real job and work because he can't make the team because of his 110 hurdle time.
Right,
So,
right. It's a delicate balancing act. If you look at, you know, some of the great hurdlers in the United States, they were also great sprinters. And I mean, case in point, Willie Gault ran on the 4x1 relay. And so you got a situation where they can do both.
yeah.
And as a matter of fact, a lot of times the hurdling actually improves the sprinting because of the extra strength and the extra mobility that the athlete gets. But it's again, it's a matter of figuring out, okay, on what days can we do our hurdling, and then what days can we do our sprinting and that type of thing with the other group, and be able to balance that out at the same time as you don't overtrain the athlete. And then, you know, one thing that back in the day when I was coaching high school, there was only one event for hurdles, and you know, they wanted to add them for the boys, the 300 hurdles, and so I fought in the state of Wisconsin for the 200 hurdles, the old Jesse Owen event back in the 30s, and this was actually for junior athletes or high school athletes a really good transition. So they feel comfortable over the 200 hurdles, then go to the 300 hurdles, and then go to the 400 hurdles once they finally mature into it. It's interesting if you look at the correlation between the 300-meter hurdle times that Karsten Warholm produces, kind of in his little meets in Norway. He ends up, every time he runs faster in the 300 hurdles, he runs the same time at the 300 hurdle mark on his way to 400. And that's one of the ways that he's really improved exponentially.
So thank you, Tricia, for your question. Now,
Thank you.
just on a little bit on that, about the coaching system in most of our Asian countries. I suppose the establishment of the Coaches Association is a move, certainly a positive move in getting the coaches across Asia to together share their knowledge through this association. But of course, still we have coaches also who are, of course, they are very competitive. Similar to the athletes, they are also very competitive. So they have that inner circle in which they want to protect. So maybe that is a little bit on what Tricia has also pointed out. So how do you see that system advancing, or the handover of athletes from coaches, and how that system, or the buddy system, as you mentioned, mentoring system, as you mentioned, can help in the development of the sports in Asia?
I think that's a few slides away. If I can just carry on, I think we're going to cover that.
Yeah, okay, so if you can.
Yep, I think we're going to cover that. So the whole thing is it's all about potential. An athlete has potential. You see an athlete and you say, okay, this person could be pretty good, and maybe you want to try, you know, athletics instead of football, and being able to do that. But the key point is that we need to help the athlete go through that developmental process and be able to paint a picture so that they can see their happy ending, and be able to reach their full potential through sport, and not only just the physical potential, but also the mental and psychological and spiritual potential. But you know, potential is just all the things you haven't done yet. And you know, to be able to get the athlete to understand that. You know, so and again, what does it mean an athlete has potential? Well, it means they've got the potential, but if they don't do anything, or they don't do the right things, or they don't put their whole effort into it, it won't happen. I remember Joyce Matawaka, who you mentioned, one of the more decorated British sprinters indoor ever. She was one of our housemates here, and she saw this little jar up on the kitchen shelf, and it said unlimited potential. And she said, "What's in that?" I said, "I have no idea what's in that." And she opened it up, and it was the things that you stick on the top of file folders in order to tell what's in the folder. And she had a big laugh about that because its potential has to do with belief, and building belief in the athletes is extremely, extremely important. And so the key point is okay, what limits athletes' potential and what can coaches do about it? There are certain things that are what we call highly alterable. They can be changed in a very positive way. And some of these things are, if an athlete is carrying too much non-functional weight, which is oftentimes body fat, it's pretty easy to teach the athlete how to modify the diet and make good choices and good selections in order to reduce the calories and increase the calorie burn, and they lose weight. When I arrived in Bangkok, I was in shock at the level of body fat that were on the female sprinters. But they bought into the concept because I explained what they were going to do, and they all came back, and they were all, when they ended up going to the SEA Games in the Philippines in December of 2019, they were all at the elite level of body fat that you would expect in a female athlete. Because it's alterable, and they were willing to do the work, put the work in, and make the changes in their behavior in order to realize that. Increasing strength training. And then what are some things that are slightly alterable that you can perform? Well, you can change the way you do your strength training and when you do your strength training. If you understand that your peak testosterone level, both male and female, is shortly before you wake up in the morning, you're going to do your strength exercises in the morning, but you're going to do your power exercises that demands a higher level of neuromuscular coordination once the brain and the nervous system is woke up in the afternoon. And so understanding that there's certain things that you can manipulate, but will give you a big benefit. And then there's some things that are unalterable. You're just not going to change it. And so, for example, if your track is measured one way and it's always a headwind, it's always going to be a headwind. Either rebuild the track or find a different track to run on for your meets, and so you have a tailwind. The other thing is that I worked with Maria Sharapova. Some of you may have recognized that name when she was 13 and 14 years old, and she wanted to try to maximize her height. Now you're thinking, okay, genetics, and she's going to be as tall as she's going to be, case closed. Well, we didn't take that approach. We basically looked at what are the things that increases the body's growth hormone naturally. One of them is high levels of strength training. The other one is hypoglycemia. The other one is sleep. And so what we did is we would have her come in, not having eaten anything in the morning, do a heavy strength training session, then basically jump into a cold bath because cold water emergence increases growth hormone response. And then she would go home and take a 2-hour nap, and then she would have breakfast. And so she's about 185, 186 she topped out at. And if you look at the rest of the family, you would say there's no way. So even things that seem slightly unalterable can be changed to increase the athlete's potential. Let's look just a little bit and very quickly here at the different developmental models in terms of transition through life. And let me say again, Peter Thompson, over the last couple of days, as well as some other coaches, have been very, very helpful in talking and bouncing some ideas off. This coordination and cooperation between coaches sharing knowledge, I think, is one of the things that you pointed out. But this is your typical breakdown. And then you look at the psychosocial development. Okay, who's around the athletes during these different periods? The coach is there. The coach and okay, the partner or that type of thing will be there, and then the later athletes in their twilight years will have the the family and the peers and the different things. I like to think of it this way, from a psychosocial standpoint. The athlete starts with the coach driving the car, and they're sitting in the back, and they're basically along for the ride. Then as we educate the athlete and they get a little bit older, they can sit in the front seat and they can look at the map. Of course, nobody has a map anymore. They got the GPS and they're helping guide in the direction. And then occasionally with an older athlete, they'll get a chance to drive once they have enough experience and they have some input into the training program. And in working with Daria Klishina the first year, 2013, after we got to know each other after a couple months, I said, well, here are 2 different workouts. Which one do you think would be most beneficial today? And she looked at me in shock. And she said, no one has ever asked me that before. But it's because the coach is trusting the athlete and the athlete is trusting the coach. It's interesting to note from a psychosocial development, in the United States, your rates are higher as a male if you're under 25 years old, because your frontal lobe does not fully develop until you're 25 years old. Your frontal lobe is what helps you make rational decisions. And so there's a neurophysiological rationale for that. Now you have academic and vocational demands that are placed on the athlete that fall at a little bit different times than some of the other developmental qualities. This is the important one to remember because we'll talk about it a little bit later also. You look at athlete development. Basically, you've got your kids athletics, which was mentioned earlier, the World Athletics Program, which follows along through several events or multiple event exposure, and then followed by event group. And then finally, in your late adolescent years, you start to specialize, and then your elite performances come in your adult years. And then it depends on how well you take care of your body, how long and how interesting it is to be able to continue to move forward. Opportunity in sport. Introductory system to the sport of athletics. The first thing is free play, and at least in the United States, that's gone now. If it's not organized by an adult, it doesn't happen. And no one except for the kids in our neighborhood would say, let's go high jump today. So we went out and we got a bunch of stuff and piled it up and put a bamboo bar across, and we started high jumping because we saw it on TV. But free play doesn't exist much anymore. And so the system and the countries that rely on schools to introduce, whether it's through physical education or actually competitive sport and local competitions, this is one of the best ways to introduce and to manage the exposure and the opportunity for young aspiring athletes. Club programs is another way. European countries, for the most part, went with club programs. Now in our economy, club programs are not as popular anymore in the different sociology, but they have their place. They have their place. Sometimes city or regional municipalities will sponsor programs. This is something that Fabiana Morish is doing right now as a hurdler that I worked with last year from Brazil. She has several programs they call social development programs, where they go out into the community sponsored by corporations, and that different facilities introduce young athletes to the sport of athletics. And she just sent me a bunch of videos from one of her social projects. It really looks like the kids are enjoying it and having fun and want to come back the next day. So being able to introduce this opportunity. Programs that are from the national governing body or the National Olympic Committee typically aren't at the grassroots level. They're typically as the athlete progresses and comes through school. And so what's possible to make a sustainable progression? You have to have local support. And whether it comes from businesses or government, there has to be something that allows sustainability. Regional support, now you're talking more about corporations. In many countries, and certainly not just in Asia, they use the opportunity to participate in the police or the military, and that is the support that's given. And then you have a job potentially that's sustainable after athletics. Commercial business support, sponsorships. This is a key thing. And we're starting to see that come back in some parts of the world, whereas over the last 15 years, it's really been on the decline. Here's another thing that you can use European clubs because they'll actually pay athletes to come and compete for them, or the United States Collegiate Support System. Now, I just recently learned that certain countries in Europe, in their sport development program, this is one of the key things that they want to do. They want to get their younger athletes, their teenage athletes, late teens, and have them come to the United States Collegiate Sports System. Here's why. The availability of support is really remarkable from a financial standpoint. There's around 1,000 universities that offer some kind of athletic scholarship, and not always in the sport of track and field, but many have track and field. Now, what does an athletic scholarship entail? Well, getting one requires that you are a certain level of a student. But in all these 1,000 universities, it's not the same requirements. And so you can be a very good student, or you can be an average student, and there's still a place where you can fall into this system. There are academic requirements. And so, encouraging people to study and do well academically is important. They now have reinstituted, they stopped it because of COVID, two standard tests that you must score a certain score on in order to get admitted into that university. Again, there's a tremendous range of scores. And they have the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA, which are the big schools. They have 3 different levels. They have the National Intercollegiate Athletics Association. These are smaller schools that have lower requirements. And then you have what's called junior colleges, which are 2-year schools that have academic or athletic aid, and they really don't require ACT or SAT scores. The big challenge, particularly in this region of the world, is you have to be able to speak English at a certain level of proficiency. Again, some universities require quite high scores on 2 or 3 different tests. Other universities don't require this at all, and that they teach you English while you're at the university the first year. And it's very forgiving, and I've recently found several people that have done that with quite good success their following years.
Laurent, I'll have to stop you there.
Okay.
Actually overshot on our time, but I believe it's certainly a great sharing by you, and we would look forward to inviting you again in this kind of meetings and forums to share your experience and your knowledge. I believe Absolutely. The last book from you just now was about exposing athletes and encouraging them to extend their progress in athletics as well as in their studies. In the US, for example, with scholarships available. I think that would be something which most of the coaches who are in attendance today would be really interested in looking towards in the future. But we would certainly would like to invite you, if you like, to maybe have a special session, maybe a focus group on sprints, for example, or on hurdles, and to see how that can be
technical aspects of sprinting and hurdling. Yeah. So yeah, we can certainly do that. Just let me know, and we can organize it for sure.
All right, thank you, Laurent. And we would like to also thank the ADC as well as together with all the coaches who are here today present with us to share this morning session with Laurent, and hopefully you have gained a lot of knowledge, and certainly it's a great effort by the ADC as well as by the Southeast Asia Coaches Association in just hyping up the atmosphere of the Olympic Games with programs like this. And the third series, of course, the final series today with Laurent Seagrave has certainly been beneficial. So thanks once again, Laurent, and thank you to everyone present here today. We'll definitely try and bring Laurent back with some more sharing session, especially as he mentioned, aspects of the space as well as the models. So thank you again, and I'll hand it back to Madam Ria.
Okay, thank you so much to Mr. Laurent Seagrave and also Mr. Zainal Abbas to make this meetings happen. Okay, so we are come to the closure of the meeting. So we wish you all good luck and see you again some other time. Once again, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Laurent Seagrave.
Happy to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you, Laurent, very much.
Thank you.
Pak Budi.
Thank you, ADC.
Welcome,
Thank you,
Pak
Pak.
Budi.